Hi everyone, happy Earth Week. Thank you so much for joining us today for the webinar, Right to Repair and the Road to Zero Waste, hosted by U.S. Public Interest Research Group. My name is Anne-Marie Green. I'm a Right to Repair campaign associate with US PIRG, where I work on zero waste and environmental issues related to right to repair on the campaign. And we are so grateful to have Heidi Sanborn, Executive Director of the National Stewardship Action Council and Extended Producer Responsibility Expert here today, as well as Amanda LaGrange, CEO of Tech Dump and Tech Discounts, which are tech refurbishing companies and also social impact companies that not only recycle electronics, but provide people who have formerly experienced incarceration career paths. So we are so grateful and excited to have them here today. And I can start by kicking us off with an overview of the environmental impacts of electronic waste and how right to repair can be a solution. Electronic waste presents a massive environmental challenge. As our consumption of devices continues to grow and grow, we buy new phones about every 2 or 3 years and new computers about every 3 or 4. We've yet to find truly effective ways to recover the energy and resources that we put into making electronics. So for that reason, electronics are the fastest growing waste stream in the world. And that's why repairing and reusing our devices is such an important solution to this environmental challenge. But electronic waste isn't just a pile of old devices in a landfill. If you look here at this picture of old phones, each of these phones has a life cycle environmental impact from its production. So it required rare earth minerals to make these phones, water usage, fossil fuel emissions. So today I'll be talking about both the environmental impacts of production as well as the disposal of electronics. But keep in mind that both production and disposal have life cycles that are difficult to trace. So this presentation is more of an overview. Also, this website, Raw Materials Academy, has a great simulation of all of the different life cycle impacts of electronics. So I would definitely suggest visiting there later if you're interested or using it as a teaching tool. So to start with production and consumption. The constant churn of new devices, our model of buy, use, and throw away, generates greenhouse gas emissions. It requires the mining of lithium and rare earth minerals in vulnerable countries all around the world without human health and environmental precautions. And it also exploits human labor in harsh conditions and low wages. So to give the example of a laptop and its climate change impact, every year, 275 million laptops are made around the world. And the manufacturing of a year's worth of laptops alone emits 150.6 billion pounds of CO2 equivalent. This number is really big and hard to contextualize. So to give an example, that's the equivalent of emitting the worth of 4,000 Empire State Buildings every year. Or alternatively, if no laptops were made in a given year, the GHG emission savings would be equivalent to running 14,700 wind turbines. So by reusing and repairing our electronics and keeping them in use for longer, we have an opportunity to help mitigate climate change. There's also the issue of mining. This photo is of a lithium salt mine in Argentina. And as you can tell from the photo, mining is inherently harmful to the environment. We essentially have to dig a giant crater in the earth, flush that crater with chemicals in order to conjure up the rare earth minerals that we need. It disrupts the local water table, and it also disrupts the natural environment. It's really hard to trace exactly where the rare earth minerals in your phone or your laptop came from. So I'll give a few examples from some popular rare earth minerals and where they might be sourced, and it paints a very ugly picture. 1/3 of the world's tin comes from informal mines in Indonesia, where working conditions are extremely hazardous and deaths are common. 60% of the world's cobalt, which is used in anything like a lithium-ion battery, come from Congo, where human rights and environmental abuses abound. The Washington Post did a great story on cobalt mining in Congo in 2016 and found that people often mine for Congo with their hands, including children who mine for Congo with their hands. Half of the world's lithium supply comes from Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, 3 countries in South America, and it causes soil contamination, air, and water pollution. We also do lithium mining here in the US. This screenshot, which I took just yesterday, is of a toxic waste dump lake in Mongolia. And surrounding this lake, there are plenty of rare earth mineral mines, including mines for cerium, which is a rare earth mineral used on the coating of iPhones. But for every ton of rare earth minerals that is mined, it creates 1 ton of radioactive waste and 2,600 cubic feet of acidic wastewater. And all of those waste byproducts are dumped here in this lake, which is an environmental disaster. A journalist who visited the lake a few years ago called it hell on earth. These minerals that are used in our electronics are also really important to the transition to renewable energy, like solar panels, wind turbines, and also lithium batteries used to store that renewable energy, like the batteries we use in electric vehicles. So better recovering these rare earth minerals, or better yet, using fewer of them in the first place, can help us accelerate towards the adoption of a zero carbon economy. Finally, in the production of electronics, there is exploited labor. This book, Dying for an iPhone, came out in 2020 and focuses on one factory in China called Foxconn, which creates a significant amount of Apple products, including half of the world's iPhones. And this factory has horrible working conditions. Workers report 12-hour workdays, being promised bonuses, but then being denied them. They get paid very low wages, and there are frequent suicide attempts at the factory itself, so that the building actually had to put up a net around it. After we use our electronics, there is the issue of disposing of them. And electronics recycling is obviously the most ideal form of disposal, but it's not perfect. The good thing is that we're producing less e-waste than we did just 5 years ago because of thinner and sleeker designs. However, because of those designs, the products that we do create are harder to reuse and recycle, so that only about 1/3 of electronic waste is actually recycled in the US. And that number has issues as well. Up to 40% of the electronic devices that we send to US recyclers actually end up abroad, and mostly in Asia. Sometimes they'll be sold to be reused on the secondary market, which is great because reusing those devices is a good form of continuing their energy input. However, sometimes they'll end up in recycling provinces like Guiyou province in China, which is also known as a cancer village, because the recycling of electronics, especially when it's done informally, is very, very dangerous. So the locals there, even if they don't practice electronics recycling themselves, if they live in the local environment, they contract myriad diseases, including different kinds of cancers. When electronics recycling is done here in the US, it'll go through a process called shredding and smelting, where all of the materials are shredded and then the valuable materials are melted down to be reused or resold on a different market. And this also has limitations. There's some materials that in our electronics which are just not valuable on another market, or they're impossible to recycle. So 20% of our electronics are made up of plastics, but the plastics used in electronics have chemicals that help them be resistant to melting, because sometimes our electronic devices heat up. But because of those chemicals, the plastic is almost impossible to melt, which makes it almost impossible to recycle. So there's certain materials that will simply go to waste, even if we do recycle our electronics. And if electronics aren't recycled or reused, they'll be landfilled. E-waste makes up only 2% of the waste stream by volume, so not very much, but it makes up 70% of its toxicity. That's because e-waste contains harmful heavy metals and chemicals like lead, mercury, and cadmium, and also flame retardants, so that when these toxins go into landfills, they can leach down into the soil and groundwater and make us sick. So it's really important to keep electronics out of landfills whenever possible. There's a very simple solution. Why don't we just fix stuff and use it for longer? But unfortunately, it's more complicated than that. Products are designed not to be repairable. This chart here is of some of the different types of proprietary screws that are used in electronics, everything from cell phones to laptops to even the electronic fan that's in your dorm room. These screws are very difficult to find screw heads for and are meant to keep you out of repairing your devices. When I fixed my iPhone recently, replaced the battery in it so that I could use it for longer, I had to use 4 different types of screw heads in order to make that repair, including a pentabolobe screw head, which is a star-shaped screw that Apple designed specifically to keep people out of devices. And because of these barriers, consumer behavior has changed. We've become really accustomed to buying new stuff, waiting for its expiration date when the battery might die, and then trading it in for new stuff. And finally, the independent repair marketplace is being undermined by manufacturer monopolies on repair. The makers of electronics, so Apple, Microsoft, Samsung, etc., their business model is for you to continue buying new electronics. That's how they make money. They don't make a lot of money on repairs. So they either want to be the ones to do your repairs or they don't want them to be done. So manufacturers like Apple, Samsung, and Microsoft restrict access to parts, tools, schematics, which are diagrams, and manuals, making it really hard for independent repair shops to do certain repairs or impossible for others. There's also new tactics to restrict independent repair. For example, on the new iPhone 12, Apple serialized certain parts to the original device. So for example, the camera. If you were to take your iPhone 12 to an independent repair shop and they replaced your camera for you, even if it was a genuine Apple camera that they replaced it with, you would lose certain functionalities in your camera. So unless you went to an Apple store, you wouldn't be able to replace your camera correctly. Certain functionalities would be lost on your camera otherwise. So this is just another tactic to restrict third-party repair. Finally, there's the issue of the digital divide here, or the unequal access to technology that we have in our country. Over the summer, there was a shortage of 5 million laptops ahead of online learning in the fall. And some families were left without an internet-connected device or a computer for their kids to go to school and learn, which is unfair and unjust. This tech refurbisher, John Bumstead, had 500 iPads in his warehouse that could be fixed and redistributed to families who really needed them. But he wasn't able to fix those laptops because they were activation locked by Apple. So if we could those iPads because they were activation locked by Apple. So if we could just fix stuff and refurbish more technology, we could provide families who need computers, who need internet connected devices with discounted technology, all while solving the issue of abundant e-waste. And that's where Right to Repair comes in. Right to Repair presents a solution for us to fix our very broken relationship with stuff. Right to Repair would ensure that you as a consumer or an independent repair shop that you took your devices to be repaired would have access to manuals, schematics, parts, and specialty tools so that you can actually repair your electronics. And all of these resources would be available at reasonable prices. It would make it easier for you to repair your stuff. It would prolong the lifespan of our stuff, and it would promote a cultural shift towards reuse, which is most important for us in our society. There are 27 states who have introduced right to repair legislation in 2021. So this legislation is very popular, and it's also bipartisan because people just want to be able to repair their stuff, or they want at least the option to repair their stuff. However, year after year, we see very fierce opposition by industry. So makers of electronics like Apple, Microsoft, Nikon, who makes cameras, and John Deere, who makes farm equipment, continuously lobby against these bills because they would challenge the dominant business paradigm of buy, use, and throw away. under which these companies operate. However, as we've seen, this business model is very unsustainable. It causes human harm, it causes environmental harm, and it exacerbates the digital inequality in our country. So that's why US PIRG works really hard to pass right to repair legislation. And so if you want to support right to repair, if you're a zero waste organization or an environmental organization, we have a sign-on open letter from these organizations that we've organized to send to state legislators and to support the bill. So if you want to sign on, that would be wonderful. If you're an individual who wants to support the right to repair or student, you can click on this link to tell your legislator that you want the right to repair, or you can get in touch with me, agreen@pirg.org, to talk more about right to repair. Wonderful. So next we're going to hear from Heidi Sanborn. I'm going to pull up her presentation.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. I guess it's afternoon all across the whole country now. And thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for that great introduction to the issue. I am very excited to talk to you all today because, you know, I've been working in this field now for 30 years, and it's been based in California. You know, and I came here because I really thought in Sacramento, California, we can do a lot. If we can get California to move, we're 40 million people, that moves markets in the United States. But we have gone way slower than I had hoped. And we're going to need to really start firing up the advocates to get out there and start pounding on some of the legislators to vote for some of these bills. So I'm going to go over what we're doing in California and in some other states on right to repair. But generally, this whole issue of waste reduction, building for durability and not obsolescence is where we have to go if we're going to achieve any sort of climate goals as well. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but I am the executive director of the National Stewardship Action Council. I'm the founding director. I was also the founding director of the California Product Stewardship Council. I formed that in 2007 to drive the producers to be more responsible for the end of life of their products. And it was so successful, we decided to do the same thing nationally. Next slide, please. So our vision is that we're going to achieve a circular economy in the United States. And we are 501c4, so we can lobby in any state in the nation. So if anybody wants to start taking these bills up in other states and want some help advocating for it, let me know. We're happy to help. But we are a group of businesses, organizations, and nonprofits, and just general advocates that want to see the producers fairly share in the responsibility for a circular economy. And we do collaborate a lot with very, the leading businesses like Interface Carpet and Aquafil and companies that lead Bioenergy DevCo. There's a bunch of them, but there's a lot more that are not moving. So we need to show them, how to do it, make sure that proof positive that you can do something if somebody's already doing it. So when they go into the legislature and say, we can't do this, we can't make this repairable, we could say, yes, you definitely can. And here's the proof. Next slide, please. So having businesses on your side is very important, but I do want to start with who we are and why it's important. I think we have diversity in all of our organizations. We took a look at ourselves after George Floyd and decided we needed more diversity to be reflective of our community. And we added new board members that we're very excited about. And they stepped up to our call to add diversity to our board, and they're highly skilled. But we've got right now a 12-member board from all over the country, including Colorado, I think where some of you are based, Texas, California, Washington, and beyond. State government, businesses, advocates, city of Los Angeles. So it's a broad group of people. Next slide, please. And, if we're going to have big change, then we have to change how we think. I used to say that it was Einstein, but apparently he didn't say this, but insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The results we've been getting are not enough. So we have to rethink how we're approaching it. And that's why I accepted the invitation to speak today, because we really do need more advocates and consumers out there clamoring for the change. The companies will change when they feel it affects their ability to sell the product and not before. I've learned over and over again that recently, due to their influence in our electoral system and their ability to vote. You know, they pay so much money to campaigns that they can kind of get away with a lot, even against public will. The only thing that will really change them is if we stop buying their product. So let's go to the next slide, please. And I do like to start with what is a circular economy, because I do hear people using these terms differently. And very simply, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's really three key things: that we need to regenerate natural systems. We've done a lot of harm, and we need to go back and fix what we've broken, not just keep doing less bad. We need to design out waste and pollution, which is part of the discussion today, and keeping these products and materials in use, which is also what we're talking about today. But I do want to remind people that we have to go back and fix what we broke with natural systems, and that we can talk about another time. Next slide, please. So again, circularity is going to include everyone. I think, as Anne-Marie mentioned, there's a lot of human abuse going on around the world, and we have voted for it with our dollars. We unknowingly are giving money to companies that are supporting children basically being abused in forced labor. We are doing that with other, adults in the same situations. And we have to do a lot better job of requiring transparency from companies in their sourcing. And that's across the board, not just the electronics industry. Next slide, please. And we're excited because this right to repair has really grown in popularity the last few years. And I do give a lot of credit to Peter Mui from the Fix It Clinic for that. He's really shaken a lot of trees and done a lot of presentations to wake us all up to this need. And I can remember my personal story with this is when I was growing up. I'm 58, and all the Hoover stores sold repairable Hoover vacuums, and we would just go back and have them repaired. So I thought, well, I'm going to go buy a new vacuum. I'll buy a Hoover. There's a store down the street. And 2 years later, I went to take it for repair, and he said, it's not worth it to repair it. You really should just buy a new one. And I said, the whole reason I bought it was so that you could repair it. Are you telling me it's really that bad? He said, yeah, they're all plastic parts now. They just break. Like, you shouldn't buy this one again. Like, wow. Okay, that's where we are. So that's just one example of how far we've gone backwards on repair. My dad, is 83. His entire generation grew up repairing everything. And so we've really gotten away from that, and we need to get back to it, because with 8 billion people plus, 7 plus growing in the world right now, we do not have enough resources to do what we're doing. But exciting things is that we've got momentum. Next slide, please. So one of the things I do in California is I was appointed last June by Cal EPA to be on the statewide commission for recycling markets and curbside recycling. And the reason I chose to do this as a volunteer is I'm kind of at, this crossroads in my career where I feel like I've been working 30 years and we're going way too slow. So I thought, well, I'm going to give this a chance to see if I can do something really big with this. And I was lucky enough to get not only appointed, but then also appointed by the commissioners as chair. And in the first 6 months, this commission, we are required to have consensus votes. We came out with 19 recommendations in 6 months with 17-0 votes, which nobody thought we could do. And so I'm very proud of the commission for that. And one of the proposals that we came out with is the right to repair. And I did have it right here. It's number 13, right to repair, in our report. And that came out in December of this year. And now we have one bill that came out of this recommendation. Go to the next slide, please. So the right to repair recommendation that we gave basically says that it would, this is to the legislature and Cal EPA. It would establish the most basic foundations for asserting that products should be repairable by the owner to protect and maximize the ability of the purchaser to determine the item's disposition, to repair it at a reasonable cost, and be able to have a third party of their choosing repair it at a reasonable cost. I won't read the rest of it, but that's basically where we are, is we're telling the legislature, you told us back in 1989 in California that the waste hierarchy was source reduction first, then recycling. But we've not done anything really about source reduction. So we're getting back as a commission, even though that really wasn't our charge, it was developing markets. We're saying we want you to get back to what you told us to do 30 years ago. and we want to start focusing on repair and reuse and source reduction. Next slide, please. But we're not the only state talking about this now. So there's other, we've got a bill in California I'll tell you about in a minute, but it's very focused on medical devices. And it's seeing opposition by the industry, but other states have a lot of it too. And so we're excited to see all this activity, but we've seen also a lot of deaths of these bills over the last few years. So now we need to start getting them over the line. Sometimes the harder bills take a few bites at the apple, but now it's really time to start really getting serious about serious advocacy in order to pass these bills. Next slide, please. So in our state, it's SB 605, Susan Eggman's bill. She's a senator now, and it's called the Medical Device Right to Repair Act. And I was really surprised she took on medical devices first, because typically when we run legislation in California, almost always the medical industry gets exempted from everything we do. And this time it went straight at them alone, which was really surprising to me. But this again will require the manufacturer of a powered medical device used in the treatment or diagnosis of patients to be able to be repaired. And that is shocking, because honestly, in the medical industry, almost everything is disposable. There's all that sanitation issues and so forth. But I have friends who have serious, type 1 diabetes, and they show me their devices. It's really outrageous how much waste there is in these devices. So we're excited about the bill. It is getting a lot of opposition from the industry. Next slide, please. But hopefully we can get it done. But you can sign up on the state legislature website to follow these bills. And every time it moves, getting your comments and testifying in support. We need all the help we can get, because if we can even get this little bill passed, which is kind of a big deal, because especially because it's medical devices, it really does show the momentum. And then we can start building on that for next year in California and beyond. So what I tell everybody is everybody matters in this stuff. It's not just any one of us. Every time you lay down $1 to vote, you vote for what you're seeing and buying, all the way through its sourcing. Whether it's a solar panel or a pencil or a medical device, it doesn't matter. So model the behavior you want to see in others so that you can help educate others, and collect data to tell your story. If you get, for example, you buy an electronic or you have a medical device that you think is very wasteful, then why don't you go ahead and take a picture of it, put it on social media, tag the company who made it, tag a few of the other competitors, tag maybe a press person that might be caring about that issue, and you would be very surprised at how fast you might get a call, because they have people who watch the internet and they don't want to have people saying bad things about their brand on the internet. So when you share it with your friends or you're an influencer of any way, this is a way to get their attention, and it's free. Convening stakeholders and finding allies. I say if you're going to take on these kinds of bills, you've got to find a political champion, somebody who can be articulate on the feet and help you really push these things over the line, and then be their best friend, amplify their message, and give them kudos and even help them get reelected. Walk and door knock for them, because they will never forget you for doing that. And I said, or become one. I actually became an elected official 2 years ago. We now just had our CEO on an electric utility board, and we are just leading the nation to get to zero carbon emissions by 2030. And we just had our CEO this morning in Congress testifying to that. So even you can, run. Think about running for something and helping be an influencer in your area. Write op-eds, articles, pursue action, get friends, find your political champions, send letters of support, and partner with organizations like us. We are partners that are nonprofits, get all our listservs and webinars for free. We like to share the information so everybody can help each other. It takes money, and we like to look for grants with our friends as well to see if we can find ways to do things together. Next slide, please. So I say it's time to get into some good trouble. Don't be afraid to make some noise, because sometimes trouble is necessary if we're going to have really big change, and it's time for some big change. Next slide, please. So I would encourage all of you, oh, and I just wanted to say, I'm lucky enough this week, I have an Earth Day match of $50,000. If you know of anybody that could help us raise money, we'd appreciate it. We'll double it. But you can follow us on social media, that's all free, and connect with us. Join us if you like, but we really would love to help you pass right to repair legislation across the country and really appreciate all the work that you're doing out there. So thanks again, Anne Marie and the PIRG, and I look forward to hearing from Amanda.
Thank you so much, Heidi. That was wonderful. And now we'll hear from Amanda.
Excellent. I have the honor of being the CEO of an organization based in Minneapolis, St. Paul called Tech Dump and Tech Discounts, where we do both electronics recycling and refurbishing. So if you'll go to the next slide, I wanted to start with just an overview about our organization, but we're going to go really deep into some of the challenges where we see right to repair as a significant solution to those challenges. So our work beyond sort of the nuts and bolts of electronics, recycling, and refurbishing, like Anne Marie mentioned in my intro, we also are focused on using that business model as a way of providing paid job training for adults facing barriers to employment, specifically men coming out of incarceration. And so our business model has electronics recycling drop-offs and pickups. Data destruction is a really important part of what we do. And then we sell refurbished electronics under the Tech Discounts name. Go figure that a name like Tech Dump doesn't instill the kind of confidence you hope for when selling refurbished items. But that's a really important part of our work from an environmental standpoint. And so where I wanted to start today, if you'll go to the next slide, is just sharing a couple of statistics. One is that last year we processed right around 4 million pounds of electronics. To date, we've processed around 35 million pounds of electronics. But last year we only refurbished about 10% of those pounds. 90% were recycled. And so you may ask, Amanda, why have you not figured out how to refurbish more of them? You may also ask, are we just getting really old electronics in? And perhaps that's why. But really what it comes down to is it's cost prohibitive, whether from a parts cost or from a labor aspect, to refurbish as much as we would like to. We see so much technology that comes in that still has plenty of potential. We just lack access to that. And so I was really grateful for comments earlier. I just kept being reminded of the really important phrase that we're not going to recycle our way out of an e-waste problem. We're not going to recycle enough gadgets to make up for the fact that we know it's the fastest growing waste stream in the world. I am very interested to see the stats that come out in the next year of just how the COVID pandemic has impacted technology use and the amount of devices that we all have in our homes. My theory is we haven't seen anything when it comes to growth rates on devices in the home. So if we can go to the next slide, I thought that I would start with two important items in my life. One is my Subaru Forester that takes me around the Twin Cities metro. And when something's wrong with my Subaru, I have the option of going to a Subaru dealership. I can go to my independent repair shop, Dale Festi, a few miles away, and have them fix my Subaru, or I can go to my local Napa Auto Parts or different auto parts shops and get it to fix myself. And yes, of course, when you have the job that I have, you find yourself deciding to fix your own vehicle. I fixed a dishwasher part in the midst of COVID. And so I've replaced my own air filter and other parts of my Subaru because of having access to parts. When it comes to my iPhone though, really my options are to go to an Apple store. Sure, we've seen some progress in the fact that there are some Best Buys that are also authorized to do repairs on iPhones, or I can go to an independent repair shop who's harvested parts. And when I talk about harvesting parts, I want you to picture like a Frankenstein, and that in the reality of iPhones, let's say my iPhone 10 had a cracked screen. My team is very versed in taking a screen from another iPhone 10 that's in great condition, but perhaps some other part of that phone wasn't working, removing it and replacing it. This is not a scalable option. I would invite you to think about how in the world I would ever have my windshield replaced on my Subaru if I had to wait until another Subaru came in that everything worked except it had, or the other person worked, but the windshield did. It doesn't make sense when you think about it in terms of other relationships to stuff. It's just, as Anne-Marie mentioned in our intro, we've gotten so used to the idea that our phones and our technology is replaceable, that we just dispose through it, and that it's not that same sort of relationship. And certainly you could make an argument that there's a price difference between my Subaru Forester and my iPhone. However, if you think about a really low entry point to a vehicle, in some cases, you may know someone whose iPhone actually, or certain versions of MacBooks, that people pay more than that than they might have for a vehicle. And so I feel like there's this piece where we just have such a disconnect with our electronics that we don't even see the flaws of it. And honestly, what I found over my tenure at Tech Dump and Tech Discounts is it's not until you break your screen, it's not until for some reason you can't get your laptop to turn on, it's not until you've had that personal experience of trying to figure out how to get it fixed and finding out, like Heidi shared, that, oh goodness, that vacuum cleaner doesn't make sense to repair, even though I paid so much up front, that you start to really get right to repair and you start to care. So if we can go to the next slide, the reason why I picked an Apple, not just because I have an iPhone, is because they're an organization that to many, when you think about zero waste, when you think of really important climate chaos commitments, they may come to mind. These are screenshots from their website. I'll put a link in the chat once I'm done presenting, just so that you can verify that I have not doctored any of these screenshots. But this is from their own environment page, saying that they're going to do one last thing. They're not going to provide a charger anymore. And also mentioning that Siri runs on clean energy. And if you'll go to the next slide, they specifically say they have a plan, that they're really focused on making their electronics as environmentally friendly as possible. And the left side is their screenshot, looking at all of these important pieces. However, when you sit and think for a minute, there's a big jump between how it's used to how it's recycled. And that's what brings us to this conversation today. What about, and why doesn't Apple have a plan for how it's fixed, right? It shouldn't require the Frankensteining to make it happen. It shouldn't require perhaps a refurbisher to go to eBay to buy a part from who knows who and to test it and to make sure that it's working to make these fixes happen. And I think the other piece that keeps coming to mind as we sort of sit with this concept of zero waste and sit with this question of how do we bring substantial change from environmental standards, there's also a piece of this list of questions on, like, does the world really need a latest and greatest phone? Like, how big of an impact would it be for Apple to say, we're going to just wait it out a little bit longer before we come out with a new version? And perhaps all the humans that are waiting for the latest and greatest, they may not even notice. They may just wait a little longer. However, we certainly could get into a deep conversation on shareholder value and shareholder expectations, but maybe we'll get there in the Q&A. I'm not going to take us there during my comments here. And so one of the pieces that I wanted to take us into next, beyond just this realization that there can be these very, what I would call shiny commitments, shiny, my words, PR stunts of Apple coming out with Daisy and Liam and these recycling robots to take apart their phones. But it's just going back to the basics to say, how are these items being created? How long are they lasting? And do we really own our own electronics if we can't fix them? And so if you'll take us to the next slide, I wanted to also just, because occasionally when talking through right to repair legislation, as we have for many years, I hear like, well, Amanda, tech dump and tech discounts is growing. You guys are doing well. Clearly, you don't need right to repair. But the problem is we can't achieve the scale that our community needs from us, that our world needs from us, without right to repair. And that's because thousands, literally, if you were to stand on our dock door, we see thousands of different gadgets and models coming through our facility every day. It is impossible for our team to know all of the pieces and all of the practices for repair without access to manuals and without access to parts. We also know that lithium batteries present completely new challenges. I could have spent all of the minutes of my presentation time talking to you about AirPods and just the complexity of having batteries in something that can't go through that traditional e-waste shredding process that we saw some images of earlier. And so we have to know how to extend these electronics, and we have to know what's in them to recycle them so that we don't have mass amounts of fires in electronics recycling facilities. And we're already seeing in many of our industry members this trend. And then finally, we've talked a little bit today about the digital divide. The piece that COVID-19, I think, really shined a light on was not just the need for technology, but also the question of what happens when supply chains break down. There was a significant period of time where you could not go out to the market and buy a brand new Chromebook. And so finally, individuals, school districts, businesses, nonprofits were looking to refurbish technology, realizing that it was just as good as new. And I think in many's eye, perhaps not the group on this Zoom, there's a belief that new technology can be trusted. Supply chains don't break down for those trusted OEMs. And the reality is the testing process that refurbished electronics goes through is far more thorough and reliable. And I believe that the supply chain has much less risk of breaking down when you have completely unprecedented events like COVID-19 or other supply chain crunches that can happen. So I know we're excited to move into Q&A. I'm sure Anne-Marie will tell us how to do that. My team says thank you for caring about right to repair, because it will make all of our lives a lot easier. And I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. If anyone has a question for the Q&A portion, please type it into the Q&A. And Kevin can read those.
Yeah, so we have a question from Chad Doherty. Has anything been done about the pricing model of consumer-grade inkjet printers, for example, where the initial printer cost, including a dribble of ink, is artificially lower than the cost of replacement ink cartridges, causing most users to throw away the entire printer when they run out of ink? I'm sure there are similar products that use this model, but this is the one that I find most offensive.
I'll let you take that, Amanda. I think you might have a better, I mean, I can tell you, I haven't heard of anybody going specifically for that myself.
I have not either. Definitely, I feel like the printer example is one of my favorites to go to as well around the right to repair for this reason, as well as the inability to repair it. It's one of the few items that we receive that unless it's a very rare sort of higher end, higher quality printer, we put just directly into our recycling line rather than trying and attempting to repair and refurbish it. And so there's a whole webinar we could have on printers. It is an area where, as we've seen an embrace of paperless, that I have some periods of hope. And especially with a more remote workforce than perhaps a year ago, that I also have some hope, but goodness, we've got a long way to go.
This is not exactly the same, but another example of a planned obsolescence business model would be light bulbs. Light bulbs, they have the technology to last years and years, but obviously That's not the case. We buy light bulbs fairly often. So that would be another example of planned obsolescence, but the printer ink one is particularly infamous for sure.
Great. Our next question is from Karen. Is there a chance for federal right to repair legislation?
You want my honest answer? Yes, but it's not going to be soon. And here's the way I look at it. We don't have like, for example, we've had bottle bills in this country for 30 years and we don't have a national bottle bill. We have a more divided country than we've ever had. I just watched a hearing on energy where our CEO was testifying for 3 hours on how we're going to get to zero carbon by 2030. And the questions that were being asked of him at a hearing that was about how to create jobs and a green economy around this were appalling and quite foolish. They weren't based on science. It was all political. That's what we have as a reality at the federal level now. So the best chance we have, in my opinion, is to go state by state, drive the bar up, and create incentives by state, where we could say to companies, if you work off or have states do their own procurement policies, which I'm working on in California, another recommendation of the commission, we don't buy what we should be buying to drive the market with public dollars, and making sure that our electronics are repairable and recyclable and durable and all of those things, and aren't being, they have a take back program and they're not being exported to countries that can't handle it. There's a whole lot in there that the states should do first and walk the talk. And then we allow companies to buy off state contracts and help them get their costs down. That's probably the fastest way to get there and achieve the same thing. But we could also look at even county ordinances that mandate producers take their electronics back. I helped pass it in California, the first in the nation on pharmaceuticals, because it was a health issue with flushing the meds, getting in the water, and also fueling drug abuse. But I truly believe that things like electronics and plastics, even packaging now, could claim there is a very significant health impact by these products when they're misused and mismanaged. So because of the heavy metals and the fires and other things in them. So we may be able to have local ordinances that require take back of electronics. And that first started actually in New York. It went to a state bill and nobody's tried it locally since. But that starts driving conversation and getting a lot of press. But if you do a couple states, a couple local governments, it starts bubbling up. And then the day comes when the companies say, oh, we need to harmonize. There's too many rules. That's how I got the state bill on pharmaceuticals in California, because I started county by county. I got 12 counties before they finally said, just do it statewide.
Yeah, a couple of pieces I would add. We've seen from e-waste statutes that electronic waste continues to be a state level ordinance and statute. And so that has been, at least in Minnesota very early on, was one of our attempts to have right to repair woven into that. And clearly didn't happen in that way. And so my assumption is that we'll continue to see that it stays at more of a state level. The piece that I always find really helpful and I think encouraging when we are talking at a state level, though, is manufacturers really only need one state to pass this for it to impact their practices and supply chain. And so if Minnesota, for whatever reason, is having issues getting it passed, I won't name any state senators that are causing us some issues locally, but a different state is able to get it to move, all Minnesota residents are going to benefit from it. And the piece that has been sort of fun and the beauty of Twitter and the internet is that we've gotten to connect with some of our counterparts over in the EU, and some of their progress and their impact is also starting to show up here. And so that's why you hear about it as a right to repair movement, is because we really just need someone somewhere to get it moving for all of us to benefit.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amanda. Thank you for that. I'll also add quickly that there was one federal right to repair bill for medical equipment specifically introduced in 2020, the Critical Medical Right to Repair Infrastructure Act. And someone previously asked in the chat Why would right to repair apply to medical equipment? Actually, medical equipment, anesthesia machines, even ventilators follow a similar model. The manufacturers of those equipment want to have control over their repair and encourage hospitals to buy new. So right to repair is unfortunately an issue in that space as well.
I would also add to that last question that the EPA is probably our best shot right now, because now that we've got a new EPA head, we'll see how fast they can move to unwind all the damage we just experienced, but they could make some moves in certain directions under the authority that they've been given also. So we'll see.
All right, our next question is there a list of businesses that people can be directed to that are right to repair aligned?
Great question. I haven't seen one, Amanda, have you?
Unfortunately not. I do, and I'll add it to the chat, often refer individuals to iFixit's repairability scorecard, but it really doesn't tell you sort of businesses to spend your dollars with. It's more of an individual purchasing guide.
Yeah.
Also repair.org. You can find independent repair technicians that can help you repair your devices there. And yes, Peter, Patagonia is well aligned towards right to repair, just in the clothing space, which is amazing and obviously very important as well.
Our next question from Gary Fisher is, are there activities to promote the repair, remanufacture of industrial equipment, not just commercial products?
What I know of that is that big industrial equipment is very expensive to have made and shipped, and they try to get every last bit out of those pieces of equipment unless for some reason they can't reuse them. So I don't think we have as big a problem there. And I know Caterpillar has done a lot to take back even their very large farm equipment and repair them and refurbish them. That's been something they've done for many years, because it is so much cheaper to refurbish than it is to make it all new. But that's all I'm aware of. Are you, Amanda, aware of anything?
Yeah, less so on the industrial piece, but on the farm equipment side, we've seen a completely different behavior from John Deere, to the point where, and my last name literally means the granary or the barn. I come from a long line of farmers. John Deere was quoted in one of the news pieces done on them that they were worried that farmers would become hackers. And when I think of my granddad LaGrange becoming a hacker, like, it warms my heart and then it makes me really mad. But the electronic components are so advanced at this point that you actually can have a really hard time getting your tractor to run without them. And that's why John Deere has been so opposed to this bill and legislation. But to other types of industrial equipment, I'm not seeing the same challenges. And I think it is because they are built to last in different ways. There are typically repair techs that are trained up and made available. It's not something that we've been hearing from. And that's one of the pieces I would say from working on this legislation for the last 6 years, is that I continue to meet new people that are also impacted by this. And so for all of us, I know we'd be happy to connect with new audiences and new individuals that are sharing a perspective and experience to just widen the conversation that we're having on right to repair.
If there's one thing I can add, I'm jumping in here. We have seen groups like Caterpillar oppose right to repair vigorously. They have a lot of the same controls set up that John Deere does. Our next question is from Bianca Lopez. How can cities help to reduce e-waste? Is there a city that we can model our practices on that do well on reducing e-waste sent to landfills?
I actually think there's a lot of them. I know in California, I worked with Palo Alto when they were upset even about Apple, how they were packaging their computers in polystyrene and threatened to stop buying them, and they're housed in Palo Alto. So Apple worked with them and changed all their packaging to be paper and cardboard instead of polystyrene. But I probably would go to, I'd have to talk to people. I don't have it off the tip of my tongue, but I know we've got a lot of cities in California that are working on that. Amanda, did you know any answers on that? Yeah.
I mean, I always try to find like the hopeful part of these conversations because we can get so dark so fast. But the reality is that even the cities that I think have had some of the most progressive examples of trying to make e-waste recycling as convenient as possible for residents and businesses is that we've still got consumer behaviors to change and for them to make it a priority. And then even beyond that, for us to move past recycling and talking about reuse and repair and minimizing our buying cycles.
Yeah, I could tell you that there's an expert I know called Alicia Culver at the Green Purchasing Institute. If anybody would know the answer to that, she'd know the best local policy probably in the nation on that. So you could talk to Alicia at the Green Purchasing Institute.
Also giving a shout out to Peter Mui of the Fix-It Clinics. Fix-It Clinics and fixing cafes and repair cafes are a great way to bring community together. And that's a great way to educate people about repair and help them repair their devices for free.
Yep.
And so with that, I think that we can wrap up. I know that there are many more questions. There's so much to talk about with right to repair, with electronic waste, but this was a great conversation. So thank you so much, Heidi and Amanda, for joining us. It's been wonderful to hear from you both. And thank you for everyone who came to attend. And please feel free to reach out to me, agreen@perg.org. Type my email in the chat to talk more. And I will also send up some materials from this webinar later sometime in the week. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Earth Week.
Thanks. And to John, we need to incentivize B corporations because I totally agree with you, your comment. Good luck, everybody. Happy Earth Week.